In this episode, we're going to build a high-yield acronym reference for the AI Security Manager, AAISM, exam that you can use as a daily audio drill, so the alphabet soup stops slowing you down. When you are new to cybersecurity, acronyms can feel like a private language that everyone else speaks, and that can make you second-guess yourself even when you understand the idea. The goal here is not to turn you into a walking dictionary, but to give you clean, simple meanings that connect directly to what the exam is testing across governance, risk, compliance, data, and AI lifecycle management. Acronyms matter because questions often assume you recognize a concept instantly, and if you get stuck decoding letters, you waste time and lose confidence. We will treat each acronym as a shortcut for a bigger idea, and we will tie it to the kind of decision or work task it represents. The result should be that when you hear one of these later, you immediately know what kind of thinking the question wants. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good first group is the acronyms that represent the basic security goals and how we talk about protecting information. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, CIA, is the classic triangle, and it is a quick way to describe what security is trying to preserve. Confidentiality is about keeping information from being seen by the wrong people. Integrity is about preventing unwanted changes, and availability is about making sure systems and data are usable when needed. In AI security, CIA shows up everywhere because training data and outputs can be sensitive, models can be tampered with, and systems can be disrupted. A beginner mistake is to treat CIA as theory, but the exam uses it as a practical lens for prioritizing controls and understanding impact. When a question hints at leaked data, think CIA and focus on confidentiality. When it hints at manipulated results or corrupted training data, focus on integrity. When it hints at outages or inability to use the service, focus on availability. Next are acronyms that represent how organizations decide what to do about risk. Governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, is a core idea for AAISM because it describes the management side of security. Governance is how decisions are made and owned. Risk is how we identify and prioritize potential harm, and compliance is how we meet obligations like regulations and contracts. Another common acronym is risk assessment, RA, which refers to the structured process of identifying threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts so you can choose appropriate controls. You may also hear key risk indicator, KRI, and key performance indicator, KPI, which are types of metrics that help leaders see whether risk is increasing or decreasing and whether a program is performing well. For beginners, the difference is that KRI is about warning signals of harm, while KPI is about progress or effectiveness. Exam questions often test whether you pick metrics that drive decisions rather than metrics that simply count activity. Now we can cover acronyms tied to privacy and personal information because AI systems often interact with data about people. Personally identifiable information, PII, is a broad label for information that can identify a person, such as names, contact details, and identifiers. Protected health information, PHI, is a more specific category related to health data in regulated contexts, and questions may treat it as higher sensitivity because it triggers stricter requirements. Data loss prevention, DLP, refers to strategies and controls designed to prevent sensitive information from leaving approved boundaries, and it can apply to outputs as well as stored data. Data Subject Access Request, DSAR, is a request from an individual to access or manage personal data, and it matters because AI systems that use personal data may need to support these rights. A common misconception is that privacy is only about storage, but AI privacy also includes what the system reveals in responses and what can be inferred from behavior. When a question involves personal data, think about minimizing collection, controlling access, and producing defensible evidence that obligations are met. Let's add acronyms tied to identity and access, because controlling who can use an AI system and what they can do is a basic security requirement. Identity and access management, IAM, refers to the overall practice of managing identities, permissions, and authentication. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, is an added layer of verification beyond a password, and it reduces the risk of account takeover. Role-based access control, RBAC, is a way to assign permissions based on job roles so access stays consistent and manageable. Least privilege, LP, is a principle that says people and systems should have only the access they need, no more, because extra access increases risk. In AI systems, access is not just about logging in, but also about what data sources a model can reach and what outputs are available to different users. If a question describes broad access to sensitive model capabilities or data, the exam often wants you to apply LP thinking and align access to roles and business need. Another important cluster is acronyms tied to oversight, proof, and structured accountability, which show up in audits and regulatory conversations. Service Level Agreement, SLA, is an agreement about expectations for service performance, and it matters if an AI system is a vendor service or an internal service promised to business stakeholders. Statement of Work, SOW, is a document that defines what work will be delivered, which matters for vendor management and control expectations. Audit Trail, AT, refers to records that show what happened, when, and by whom, and it is critical when you need to prove conformity or investigate incidents. Evidence is not an acronym, but it is the outcome these documents support. You want to be able to show that controls existed and were followed. Beginners often assume documentation is busy work, but for AAISM, documentation is what makes decisions defensible. If a question talks about regulators, contracts, or proving compliance, think in terms of audit trails, clear requirements, and evidence. Now let's address acronyms that are common in security operations and incident response, because AI systems still live inside broader security programs. Security Operations Center, SOC, is the team or function that monitors and responds to security events. Incident Response, IR, is the structured approach to preparing for, detecting, containing, and recovering from incidents. Mean time to detect, MTTD, and mean time to respond, MTTR, are metrics that describe how quickly issues are noticed and handled. In an AI context, incidents might include data leakage through outputs, unauthorized access to model capabilities, or model behavior causing harm, not just classic malware. The exam often expects you to understand that AI security does not replace traditional incident response. It adds new scenarios and new evidence needs. A beginner takeaway is that the organization must be ready to detect and respond when AI systems misbehave, and that requires monitoring and clear escalation paths. If a question points to a failure or unexpected behavior, the exam may be testing how you coordinate IR, evidence, and governance decisions. Because this is an AI-focused certification, you also need acronyms tied to how AI systems are evaluated and how harm is reduced. Machine learning, ML, is a broad term for systems that learn patterns from data, and it is often used as the technical backbone for modern AI. Large language model, LLM, refers to a model trained to understand and generate language, and it is commonly used in assistants, summarizers, and chat-style systems. Reinforcement learning from human feedback, or LHF, is a training approach where human preferences guide model behavior, which matters because it shows that model behavior can be shaped by processes and decisions, not just data. Retrieval Augmented Generation, or AG, refers to a pattern where a model uses retrieved information from a knowledge source to answer questions, which changes risk because it can pull sensitive data into outputs if access is not controlled. These terms are not here to make you technical, but to help you recognize system types and understand why certain risks appear. If a question mentions language generation, summaries, or assistance, LLM concepts and output risk become relevant. Now we should cover acronyms tied to fairness, transparency, and trust, because AI security management includes these concerns when they create business and compliance risk. Explainable Artificial Intelligence, XAI, refers to approaches that help people understand why an AI system produced a certain result. Bias is not an acronym, but you may see references to fairness, accountability, and transparency, FAT, as a general theme, even if the exact phrase varies. Model risk management, MRM, is a practice of governing models, evaluating risk, validating performance, and monitoring change, which has been common in finance and is increasingly relevant for AI. These ideas matter because a system can be secure in the classic sense and still be unacceptable if it behaves unfairly or cannot be explained in regulated decisions. The exam often rewards answers that include evaluation and governance steps that anticipate these issues rather than reacting later. A beginner should remember that trust is not a feeling. It is built through clear requirements, testing, monitoring, and accountability. When a question points to high-impact decisions, transparency and validation become more important. We also need acronyms tied to standards and frameworks, because AAISM expects you to organize work using established structures rather than inventing everything from scratch. National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, is a major source of cybersecurity frameworks and guidance, and it often appears as a reference point for organizing controls and risk management. International Organization for Standardization, ISO, refers to a family of standards, including security management standards that many organizations use to structure policies and controls. Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies, COBIT, is a governance framework often associated with IT governance and control practices, and it may be relevant when mapping governance routines and accountability. The point for beginners is not to memorize every detail of these frameworks, but to recognize that frameworks provide shared language and structured categories. Exam questions may ask what approach helps create consistency and defensible practices, and frameworks are often the right answer because they reduce guesswork. If you see a question about organizing governance or controls, a recognized framework is often a strong choice. Acronyms also show up in the world of third parties and supply chain risk, which is especially important when AI depends on vendors, data providers, and external services. Third-party risk management, TPRM, refers to assessing and managing risk introduced by vendors and partners. Vendor management, VM, is a broader practice of selecting vendors, setting expectations, and monitoring performance. Due diligence, DD, is the process of investigating a vendor or solution before committing, and it often includes security and compliance checks. A key beginner insight is that you cannot outsource accountability, even if you outsource technology. The exam often tests whether you will set clear requirements, evaluate a vendor's controls, and maintain evidence of that evaluation. If a question describes a vendor model changing behavior or handling sensitive data, think about TPRM and the need for ongoing oversight. In AI systems, vendor changes can affect outputs quickly, which makes monitoring and clear agreements even more important. Finally, let's talk about how to use acronyms for daily practice so they become automatic instead of intimidating. The goal is to build recognition first, meaning you instantly know what a set of letters points to, and then build meaning, meaning you know what decision or risk it connects to. A practical drill is to take an acronym, say the full term once in your head, then immediately explain the idea in one plain sentence without the term. For example, you might see CIA and say confidentiality, integrity, availability, then explain that security protects data from being exposed, altered, or unavailable. You might see G or C and explain that organizations decide what they value, identify risk, and meet obligations in a structured way. You might see IAM and explain that only the right people should have the right access to the right data and capabilities. This method prevents acronyms from becoming empty labels and turns them into mental shortcuts for reasoning through questions. Over time, you will notice that the same acronyms keep showing up because the exam is testing recurring themes. As we wrap up, remember that acronyms are not the knowledge. They are the labels attached to the knowledge, and your job is to connect each label to a clear idea and a real work behavior. When you recognize CIA, you know what kind of harm is being discussed and what type of protection matters most. When you recognize G or C, you know the question is about structured decision-making, accountability, and meeting obligations. When you recognize PII and DLP, you know data exposure and output risk are in play. When you recognize IAM, RBAC, and LP, you know access needs to be controlled and justified. When you recognize SOC and IR, you know detection, response, and evidence become critical. This daily practice will make you faster, calmer, and more accurate because you will spend your energy on reasoning instead of decoding letters. That is exactly what high-yield acronym fluency is meant to give you.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.